Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever walked into a room surrounded by people and still felt completely alone? It's a hollow kind of loneliness, one that tells you something's wrong with you. Maybe you've thought, if I were more likable, more interesting, or just ... less me, I'd have the kind of friendships that others seem to have so effortlessly. In our culture, self-sufficiency is often held up as the gold standard of strength and resilience. The idea that we can take care of ourselves, meet our own needs, and stand independent of others is portrayed as the hallmark of a fulfilled life. We admire the lone wolf, celebrate the fiercely independent, and silently envy those who seem to glide through life without leaning on anyone. But beneath this polished narrative lies a myth that keeps us isolated and often deeply unhappy. Self-sufficiency, as it's commonly understood, is not the strength we think it is. Instead, it's often a form of armor we use to protect ourselves from vulnerability, connection, and the messy, unpredictable beauty of human relationships. It usually starts early. Somewhere along the way, most of us receive the message explicitly or implicitly that relying on others is weak. Maybe it's a parent who says, "Don't cry, handle it yourself," or a teacher who praises the students who never ask for help. Maybe it's a friend who shrugs off their struggles with a dismissive, "I'm fine," or the constant barrage of social media posts showcasing people who appear to have it all together. Over time, we internalize the idea that asking for support or admitting we need others is a failure. And so we bury our needs, stuff down our emotions, and try to figure out how to go it alone. At first glance, self-sufficiency seems like a win. It makes us feel in control. If we don't rely on others, they can't hurt us. If we keep our walls high, we avoid rejection, disappointment, or betrayal. But the cost of this so-called strength is enormous. When we shut people out to protect ourselves, we also shut out the possibility of connection, intimacy, and joy. Here's the irony: human beings are wired for connection. It's in our biology. From the moment we're born, we are dependent on others for survival. Babies don't just need food and shelter, they need touch, eye contact, and care. These aren't luxuries, they're essential for growth and well-being. And while we grow older and gain independence in some areas, our need for connection doesn't disappear, it transforms. We no longer need someone to hold our hand crossing the street, but we do need someone to hold space for us when we're overwhelmed. We need people who will listen, celebrate, and comfort us. But the myth of self-sufficiency tells us to deny that need. It whispers you should be able to handle this on your own. It convinces us that loneliness is a personal failing, not a natural signal that something is missing. And so instead of reaching out, we pull back. Instead of asking for help, we push through. Over time, this myth isolates us. It creates a false sense of independence that leaves us more disconnected than ever. When we're hurting, we convince ourselves no one wants to hear about our struggles. When we succeed, we downplay our joy because we don't want to seem boastful. We shrink ourselves to fit into the image of the strong, independent individual we think we're supposed to be. The myth of self-sufficiency doesn't just harm our relationships with others, it harms our relationship with ourselves. When we buy into the idea that we shouldn't need anyone, we start to see our natural emotions, loneliness, sadness, even happiness, as problems to solve rather than signals to honor. We tell ourselves, "I shouldn't feel this way. I should be stronger." We become our own harshest critics, perpetuating a cycle of shame and isolation. What's more, the myth of self-sufficiency creates a dangerous illusion of control. Life is unpredictable. No matter how competent, organized, or independent we are, there will always be moments when we need others. A health crisis, a career setback, a heartbreak, these are part of the human experience, not signs of weakness. But if we've spent years convincing ourselves that we can and should handle everything alone, these moments hit harder. Instead of seeing them as opportunities to connect, we see them as proof of our failure. Breaking free from the myth of self-sufficiency requires a fundamental shift in how we view strength. Real strength isn't about doing everything alone, it's about knowing when to reach out. It's about having the courage to say, "I can't do this by myself." It's about understanding that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's the birthplace of connection, courage, and resilience. This shift also involves challenging the stories we tell ourselves. When we think I should be able to handle this, we can ask, who taught me that? Is it true? When we feel tempted to push people away, we can remind ourselves that connection is a need, not a luxury. The truth is, no one is truly self-sufficient. Even those who appear to have it all figured out have moments of doubt, fear, and longing for connection. The people we admire for their independence, they didn't get there alone. They had teachers, mentors, friends, and loved ones who supported them along the way. What the myth of self-sufficiency doesn't tell us is that independence and connection aren't opposites, they're partners. We can be strong and still need others. We can take care of ourselves and still ask for help. We can be independent and still crave connection. When we let go of the myth, we open ourselves to a richer, more authentic life. We stop pretending to have it all together and start embracing the messy, beautiful truth of being human. We realize that true strength isn't about standing alone, it's about standing together. At the heart of every meaningful relationship is vulnerability. It's the unspoken truth behind the friendships that make us feel alive, the family bonds that sustain us, and the love that endures life's challenges. Yet vulnerability often feels like the last thing we want to embrace. It's that shaky, uncertain feeling of being exposed, of showing someone else who we truly are. Most of us are conditioned to think of vulnerability as a weakness. From a young age, we learn to associate strength with stoicism and self-reliance. We admire those who seem unshakable, those who can handle anything without breaking a sweat. Vulnerability, by contrast, feels dangerous. It's the risk of being judged, misunderstood, or rejected. So we hide it, we put up walls, wear masks, and try to project an image of invincibility. But in doing so, we cut ourselves off from what we crave most: connection. Think about the relationships that have mattered most to you. Were they built on perfection and pretense? Or were they forged in moments of honesty when you let your guard down and shared your fears, dreams, or failures? True connection doesn't happen when we show others the polished version of ourselves. It happens when we allow them to see the real us. Vulnerability is the bridge between two hearts. It's the moment when we say, here I am flawed, messy, and human. Will you still accept me? It's terrifying, yes, but it's also profoundly liberating. When we let go of the need to be perfect, we create space for authenticity. And authenticity is where connection thrives. What makes vulnerability so powerful is its reciprocity. When one person has the courage to be vulnerable, it often inspires others to do the same. Imagine someone at work admitting they're overwhelmed or uncertain about a project. Their honesty doesn't make you think less of them, it makes them relatable. It gives you permission to share your own struggles. Vulnerability breaks down barriers and reminds us that we're not alone. Yet for all its benefits, vulnerability is rarely easy. It requires trust not just in others, but in ourselves. It means trusting that even if someone rejects us, we'll survive. It means believing that our worth isn't tied to anyone else's opinion. This kind of trust takes time to build, especially if we've been hurt before. Many of us have experienced moments when our vulnerability was met with dismissal, ridicule, or betrayal. These experiences can make us wary of opening up again. But vulnerability isn't about throwing open the doors to everyone we meet. It's about choosing wisely. It's about finding people who've earned the right to hear our stories, those who value and respect our courage. Trustworthy people don't always come pre-labeled, but we can recognize them by how they respond when we test the waters of vulnerability. Do they listen without judgment? Do they reciprocate with their own honesty? Do they make us feel seen and valued? Even in safe spaces, vulnerability can be uncomfortable. It often comes with a voice in our head saying, what if this backfires? This fear is natural, but it's important to remember that vulnerability isn't about controlling the outcome, it's about being true to ourselves. When we share a part of our inner world with someone, we can't guarantee how they'll react. But whether they meet us with kindness or indifference, our willingness to show up authentically is an act of courage. The opposite of vulnerability isn't strength, it's defensiveness. When we refuse to be vulnerable, we may think we're protecting ourselves, but we're also limiting our capacity for joy, love, and connection. Defensiveness keeps people at arm's length. It says, you can see this version of me, but not the real me. Over time, this creates a lonely kind of existence, one where we're surrounded by people but never truly known. Ironically, our attempts to avoid vulnerability often cause the very pain we're trying to prevent. For example, if we're afraid of rejection, we might put up walls to keep others from getting too close. But in doing so, we create distance, which can make others feel unwelcome. If we're afraid of being judged, we might hide our struggles, leaving us feeling isolated and unseen. In trying to protect ourselves, we end up perpetuating the disconnection we fear. Vulnerability is also at the core of resilience. It's what allows us to face life's challenges without losing our humanity. When we admit that we're struggling, we open the door for support and understanding. When we acknowledge our fears, we make room for courage. And when we share our failures, we remind ourselves that we're not defined by them. One of the most surprising things about vulnerability is how it changes our perspective on others. When we're vulnerable, we invite empathy not just from others, but for others. Sharing our own struggles helps us recognize that everyone is fighting their own battles. It softens our judgments and strengthens our compassion. Ultimately, vulnerability is what transforms relationships from superficial to soulful. It's what turns acquaintances into friends, colleagues into collaborators, and partners into soulmates. It's the raw, unpolished truth of who we are. And it's the most beautiful gift we can offer someone else. Shame is a powerful force, but it operates in silence and shadows. Unlike guilt, which says, I did something bad, shame whispers, I am bad. It doesn't critique our actions, it attacks our identity. This makes shame deeply personal and often paralyzing. Its effects are profound, yet many of us don't even recognize its presence in our lives. Shame thrives in secrecy. It convinces us that our flaws, failures, and insecurities are so unacceptable that they must be hidden. It tells us to stay silent because if people knew the truth about us, about our mistakes, weaknesses, or even our dreams, they would reject us. This silence gives shame its power. When left unspoken, it grows, wrapping itself around our self-worth and shaping how we see the world. At its core, shame is rooted in the fear of disconnection. Human beings are wired for connection. We crave belonging. Shame exploits this need by suggesting that our imperfections make us unworthy of love, respect, or acceptance. It's the voice that says, you're not enough, you're not smart enough, attractive enough, successful enough, or lovable enough. For many, shame starts early in life. It can come from harsh criticism, unrealistic expectations, or messages that teach us our value is tied to performance. A child who is scolded for making a mistake might internalize the idea that they must be perfect to be loved. A teenager who is teased for their appearance might learn that their worth depends on how they look. Over time, these messages become part of our internal narrative, shaping how we think about ourselves and our place in the world. The effects of shame can be seen in nearly every aspect of life. It influences how we approach relationships, work, and even our own personal growth. In relationships, shame can make us hesitant to be vulnerable. If we believe that our true selves are flawed or unworthy, we may keep others at a distance to avoid rejection. This fear of being found out can lead to superficial connections, where we show others only what we think they want to see. In the workplace, shame can manifest as perfectionism or overachievement. It tells us that failure is unacceptable and that our worth is tied to our productivity or success. While this might drive short-term results, it often leads to burnout and anxiety. When we inevitably make mistakes, shame magnifies them, turning small missteps into evidence of our inadequacy. Shame also affects how we view ourselves. It's the reason we downplay our accomplishments or feel like imposters in our own lives. It's the force behind self-doubt, convincing us that we're not deserving of the opportunities or happiness we've earned. Left unchecked, shame can lead to feelings of unworthiness that keep us from pursuing our goals or taking risks. Perhaps the most insidious thing about shame is how it isolates us. When we feel ashamed, our instinct is often to hide. We don't want others to see our perceived flaws, so we retreat into ourselves. But this isolation only reinforces shame's narrative, making it harder to break free. Shame also has a way of becoming self-perpetuating. When we experience shame, we might lash out, withdraw, or engage in behaviors that create more shame. For example, someone who feels ashamed about their body might avoid social situations, which can lead to loneliness and reinforce feelings of inadequacy. Or someone who feels ashamed of a mistake at work might become overly defensive, straining relationships with colleagues. The cultural factors that contribute to shame cannot be ignored. Many societal norms and expectations set impossible standards, particularly for women, people of color, and marginalized communities. For women, shame might center around beauty, motherhood, or success, with messages that imply they can never be enough in all areas at once. For men, shame often ties to strength, stoicism, and financial success, discouraging emotional expression or vulnerability. These cultural messages are pervasive, and they add another layer of complexity to the already personal nature of shame. It's important to recognize that shame is universal. No one is immune to it. Whether it's shame about our past, our appearance, our abilities, or even our thoughts, it's something everyone experiences at some point. But because shame thrives in silence, we often believe we're the only ones feeling it. This illusion of isolation can make shame even harder to confront. Despite its destructive nature, shame does serve a purpose. It alerts us to moments when we feel out of alignment with our values or disconnected from others. However, it becomes toxic when it goes unaddressed, embedding itself into our sense of self. The antidote to shame is empathy. When we share our shame stories with someone we trust, we interrupt its cycle of secrecy. Empathy from others hearing me too, or I understand, challenges shame's narrative of isolation and unworthiness. It reminds us that we're not alone and that our imperfections don't define us. Self-compassion also plays a crucial role in dismantling shame. By treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we'd offer a friend, we create space to acknowledge our struggles without judgment. This doesn't mean ignoring mistakes or flaws. It means recognizing that they're part of being human. Shame's silent role in our lives can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to control us. By bringing shame into the light, naming it, sharing it, and confronting it, we can begin to reclaim our sense of worth and connection. Belonging is one of the most profound human needs, yet it is often the one we overlook or take for granted. We are wired for connection from the moment we're born. We seek attachment. We yearn to be seen, understood, and accepted. Belonging isn't just a luxury or a feel-good concept. It's essential to our survival, well-being, and sense of self. It is, in many ways, the antidote to loneliness, shame, and isolation. At its core, belonging is about finding a place, a group, or a community where we are accepted for who we truly are, without needing to change, mask, or hide parts of ourselves. It's not about fitting in or conforming to a mold. It's about being recognized and valued despite our imperfections. When we experience true belonging, we feel connected, safe, and empowered to show up as our authentic selves. Belonging is different from acceptance. Acceptance often requires us to meet certain standards or norms, to perform in specific ways to be worthy of inclusion. It's conditional. Belonging, however, is unconditional. It's not based on what we do or don't do or how we measure up to others. It's about being part of something greater than ourselves, whether that's a family, a community, a team, or a social circle. It's about being invited into a space where we don't have to earn our place. We simply take our seat at the table, knowing that our presence matters. However, the need to belong isn't always straightforward. Many of us struggle with feelings of exclusion, whether we are dealing with rejection from a particular group or simply struggling with the fear that we don't quite fit in anywhere. These experiences can leave us feeling disconnected from others and, more dangerously, disconnected from ourselves. When we feel like we don't belong, we often begin to question our value, our worth, and our place in the world. The fear of not belonging can be incredibly isolating. It is often linked to deeper feelings of shame, where we internalize the belief that we are not good enough, not worthy of being loved or included. This fear can create a cycle of avoidance, where we distance ourselves from others to protect ourselves from the pain of rejection. But this only deepens the sense of isolation. The more we pull away, the more we perpetuate the very thing we fear most, being alone. Belonging is a powerful antidote to these fears. When we find a place where we are truly accepted, we feel seen and heard. We no longer have to perform or pretend to be something we're not. We can show up fully, knowing that we are worthy of love and connection, just as we are. This sense of being enough is a fundamental part of belonging. We don't need to change ourselves to fit someone else's idea of who we should be. We belong because of who we already are. This is why belonging is so transformative. It has the ability to heal wounds that have been inflicted by rejection, criticism, and judgment. When we find our people, those who see us and embrace us for our true selves, we are given the gift of self-acceptance. We begin to internalize the belief that we are enough, that we don't need to prove our worth to anyone. Belonging reminds us that our value is inherent, not based on external validation or performance. However, the journey to finding belonging isn't always easy. For many, it involves confronting long-held fears of inadequacy, rejection, and unworthiness. It means confronting the stories we've been telling ourselves about who we are and whether we deserve to be loved and accepted. This can be uncomfortable and even painful at times, especially when we've experienced rejection or abandonment in the past. Yet, in order to experience true belonging, we must first be willing to believe that we are worthy of it. Another challenge that many people face in the search for belonging is the feeling of not measuring up to societal or cultural standards. Society often sets rigid expectations for what it means to belong, whether that's in terms of appearance, career, relationships, or lifestyle. The pressure to conform to these ideals can lead to feelings of alienation and inadequacy, as we feel we must constantly strive to meet unattainable standards. But true belonging doesn't demand conformity. It thrives on diversity, individuality, and authenticity. It is the understanding that we don't have to be alike in order to belong, we simply need to be real. Belonging also requires vulnerability. It takes courage to show up as we are flawed, imperfect, and sometimes unsure. Vulnerability is the foundation of connection. It's the willingness to expose our true selves without the armor of perfection or the facade of invulnerability. This is often the hardest part of belonging, the courage to let go of the mask, to admit that we need others, and to trust that we will be accepted despite our imperfections. The power of belonging extends far beyond personal relationships. It is also a powerful force in communities, organizations, and society at large. When people feel they belong to something greater than themselves, whether it's a movement, a cause, or a shared vision, they are more likely to contribute, collaborate, and support one another. Belonging fuels creativity, innovation, and resilience. It creates a sense of collective purpose, where individuals feel invested in the well-being and success of the whole. Ultimately, belonging is about creating spaces where people can be seen and valued for who they truly are. It's about dismantling the barriers that divide us, whether those barriers are based on race, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic status, or any other factor, and creating a world where everyone has a place. Belonging is not a privilege reserved for a select few. It is a basic human right that we all deserve. When we experience belonging, we come alive. We feel connected, supported, and understood. We feel the freedom to be ourselves, knowing that we are worthy of love and respect. And it is this feeling of belonging that has the power to heal the deepest wounds, rebuild broken spirits, and create a more compassionate world. Life often presents us with moments when we find ourselves standing at a crossroads, unsure of what comes next. It's a space filled with uncertainty, discomfort, and sometimes even fear. Whether it's a career change, the end of a relationship, a personal setback, or a shift in our sense of purpose, the courage to begin again is something that many of us will face at some point in our lives. The decision to start over is daunting, but it also offers an opportunity for growth, transformation, and renewal. The act of beginning again requires a kind of bravery that goes beyond the surface. It's easy to look at someone who appears to have reinvented themselves and assume that they simply made a bold decision or had the perfect circumstances. But in reality, the courage to begin again is rooted in a deep understanding of our vulnerabilities and an openness to embracing change, no matter how uncomfortable or challenging it may be. There's something uniquely humbling about starting over. Whether it's moving to a new city, switching careers, or learning a new skill, beginning again often comes with a sense of failure or self-doubt. We may look back on the path we've taken, wondering if we could have done things differently or if we wasted time. It's easy to get lost in the what-ifs and the regret of past choices. But in order to summon the courage to begin again, we must first accept that every experience, even the painful or disappointing ones, has brought us something valuable. In fact, it is precisely these experiences that prepare us for the next chapter. It is through our failures, mistakes, and moments of uncertainty that we learn resilience, patience, and strength. The idea of starting over doesn't mean erasing our past, it means using our past as a foundation for the future. Every setback, every struggle, and every challenge holds lessons that can guide us forward, even when the way ahead seems unclear. Courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, it means moving forward in spite of it. When we decide to begin again, we're often faced with the fear of the unknown, the fear of not being good enough, or the fear of making the same mistakes. But it's in facing those fears that we discover the strength within ourselves to move forward. Courage is not the lack of doubt, but the willingness to act even when the outcome is uncertain. It's about trusting that we can handle what lies ahead, even if we don't know exactly what that will look like. One of the most difficult aspects of starting over is overcoming the narrative we have created about ourselves. Many of us have internalized a story about who we are and what we are capable of. We might believe that we're too old, too inexperienced, or too far along in life to start something new. These stories become obstacles in themselves, limiting our potential and keeping us stuck in a cycle of complacency. To begin again, we must challenge these beliefs and allow ourselves to rewrite the narrative. It's not about erasing who we've been, it's about recognizing that who we are is always evolving. Starting over often means letting go of the identity that we have attached to our past, whether it's our role in a relationship, a job, or a place we may find it difficult to let go of what we once thought defined us. This process can feel like a loss, a disconnection from the version of ourselves that we have known for so long. But in order to embrace the new, we must make space for it. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting, it means accepting that change is inevitable, and with it, new opportunities for growth. The courage to begin again is not just about taking action, it's about practicing self-compassion. When we face failure or challenges, it's easy to become our harshest critic. We might tell ourselves that we're not good enough or that we've wasted time. But in order to move forward, we need to be kind to ourselves. Beginning again is an act of self-love. It's about acknowledging that we deserve the opportunity to grow, to try again, and to start fresh, even if we stumble along the way. This process of self-compassion involves quieting the inner critic and making room for curiosity. When we begin again, we are essentially starting from a place of not knowing. It's a chance to approach life with the openness of a beginner, to be willing to learn, to experiment, and to embrace uncertainty. This mindset allows us to see challenges as opportunities for exploration rather than obstacles to our success. When we are curious about what comes next, we free ourselves from the pressure of perfection and give ourselves permission to grow at our own pace. Another essential part of finding the courage to begin again is seeking support from others. Starting over is rarely a solitary experience. While the decision to change our lives may be personal, the journey often involves the help, encouragement, and insight of those around us. Whether it's a friend, family member, mentor, or therapist, having people to share our thoughts and fears with can provide us with the strength to continue. These connections remind us that we don't have to navigate the unknown alone. When we have a supportive community around us, we are reminded that it's okay to ask for help, to lean on others when we need it, and to celebrate small victories along the way. Support from others not only validates our decision to begin again, but also provides us with the emotional resources to overcome the inevitable obstacles that will arise. Finally, it's important to remember that beginning again is a process, not a one-time event. It's easy to expect that once we make the decision to change, everything will instantly fall into place. But real transformation is often slow and nonlinear. There will be moments of doubt, frustration, and setbacks, but each step forward, no matter how small, is progress. The courage to begin again is rooted in persistence, in the belief that each attempt brings us closer to the life we want to create. Starting over isn't about having it all figured out, it's about taking the first step, even when we're uncertain of the path ahead. It's about trusting ourselves in the process of change. The courage to begin again is not only about redefining our future, it's about embracing the uncertainty and finding power in the act of starting, no matter how many times it takes. In conclusion, the courage to begin again is a transformative force that empowers us to break free from the constraints of our past and step into the unknown with hope and resilience. It's a reminder that our worth is not defined by our failures or the obstacles we face, but by our ability to rise and embrace new beginnings, no matter how daunting they may seem. This journey requires self-compassion, vulnerability, and an openness to growth. As we challenge our fears, rewrite the narratives we've built around ourselves, and lean on the support of others, we create space for a more authentic, fulfilling life. The courage to begin again is not just about changing our circumstances, it's about embracing change as an opportunity to reconnect with our truest selves and pursue the life we're meant to live. Through each new beginning, we find strength, purpose, and the belief that the best is yet to come.